You can go online at coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Norrie, Lloyd Pye with us. Lloyd, let's go back then. Are you saying that the visitations occurred 900 years ago or even farther back?
Well, they could definitely have been farther back. They could also have been recently. All we're going to be able to do is pin one down at 900 years ago, plus or minus 40 years. I happen to believe in the testimony of women who claim that they are harvested even to this day, meaning that they are taken on board, they are made pregnant, they go to a doctor, they have a sonar scan, they are pregnant, no doubt about it. And then in the fourth month, in the start of the second trimester, they lose it. They have all the signs of a miscarriage with no fetus. And then some years later, they'll be taken on board and they'll be shown their child. I have on my in the book, I have an explanation and drawings from a woman named Josie Galante in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And she had that experience well before the Starchild came to light, and she drew her little 5-year-old son that she saw in this way, and the outline of his head, front and back, we have the Starchild Skull superimposed on her drawing, which again she created before the Starchild knowledge was known, and it just fits remarkably well. Also in the book, you can see another story even more interesting to me. A man in 1978, a lawyer, was taken on board, and he saw them, and he had a good memory of what he had seen, and he hired a sculptor to sculpt a bust of the Greys that he dealt with, the aliens that he dealt with in 78. And same thing, when you put the Starchild, you superimpose it over that bust. Again, it's a remarkable likeness, and then you put the boy that Josie drew and the Starchild skull and the sculpture together side by side, and it's remarkable. These are the kind of things that are in the book. And by the way, I hate to do this, but I forgot to say that this is important. For those who want to get the hardback, if you can't get it online, there is an 800 number, 1-800-992-4821. That's 1-800-992-4821. Get it online if you can. If you can't, that's the way to do it, the hardback. Otherwise, just go to Amazon and get the paperback.
Lord, let's go back now. This is high speculation on your part, but I want you to kind of paint us a picture on this visitation. If indeed you are correct, the mother is human, the father is not. Tell me what you think happened back then.
Well, first of all, it's not speculation. The mother's human, the father's not. That's what the DNA showed clearly in 203, so we've got that to work with. Now, how did it happen? I do not think it happened by a natural sexual union. I think it had to have happened genetically in a lab, in vitro. I don't think any of the women today who claim that this happens to them say that it happens from a natural sexual union. It's done with needles through their navel, and we all know the stories of that, how they tell that it happens, and I believe that that's their way of in vitro fertilizing them. And I don't think you can get a natural union between beings that are so far different. So I think that the Starchild was probably an in vitro laboratory creation. And understand, when we say that the Starchild is a hybrid between a human being and something else, people tend to think that automatically means, well, 50-50.
Right.
But it isn't like that. Even with you and me.
And also a natural birth.
Exactly that, too. But even with you and I, we are more like our mothers, or 60-40 like our dad or our mother, or 70-30 even. But when you do it genetically, when you do it in a lab, you can make it whatever you want it to be. You can make it 90% one and 10% the other. That's still a hybrid, but it's very narrow on the side of one of them. I think personally that the Starchild, when we are able to look at its whole genome, if you go on just the skull, George, and you look at the 24 2 dozen major physiological differences between it and a normal human, understanding that every one of those differences requires a different gene than a normal human gene. When you look at those and you extrapolate that out across the whole body, I think that the difference is going to be like 90% whatever the dad was and 10% human, maybe even 5%. I think the difference is going to be marked, extreme, perhaps even larger than the difference between a human being and a chimp. I think when the Starchild is completely sequenced, the difference between a chimp and a human is 3%, and look how different a chimp is. The Starchild could be 3%, it could be 5%, it could be even more. Now, that's going to be such a bombshell, but even if it's 1%, if it's just only 1 full percent, that's huge. That's absolutely huge in the world of genetics because, again, a chimp is 3%, a gorilla is 5% away from human. But if you just look at how many physiological differences in the skull, it tells me, it tells those of us that that have read the book enough and really understand the mechanics of how it was how this unfolded. You realize, God, this thing is so different; it can't not come up. Just incredibly.
How many of them do you think they genetically altered? I mean, you've only found this one.
Right.
There's got to be more.
Well, I think, George, what it is there's a big. I think there's a major ongoing program, and there has been for who knows thousands of years. Who knows what these beings are created for? But I think that they're created. We've got something they need to make a being that is going to function better in a certain place. And I think those beings are taken, those children are taken to whatever place they're going to. I don't think they're made for like food or anything like that. They're made to populate a place. And that place needs something we have in the same way that I believe we were put here too. I think we were genetically engineered and put here. Well, those beings that are using some of our DNA and some of somebody else's DNA are being put somewhere else. And so it's an ongoing program. How the Starchild escaped that, how the Starchild managed to escape the net, so to speak, was only because the human that was found with it in the mine tunnel deliberately wanted to somehow not have it found. So she went way out into the boonies. She found a mine tunnel. She went in there and she buried it in there, and she killed herself and died with it. And so she made an effort to have this result. Now, the odds on 900 years later, a 15-year-old girl stumbling into that mine tunnel and finding those bones and bringing them out, and then 70, 80 years after that, falling into the hands of Ray and Melanie Young, and then them getting in touch with me. All of that is like it's the equivalent of the shepherd finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it happened. I mean, it just happened, and we get to deal with that, the result of whatever that's going to turn out to be. But I think nearly all of them are recovered and taken to wherever they want to, and the Starchild somehow escaped the net. That's how I interpret it.
Amazing. Truly, truly remarkable.
I think so.
What might have been going on this planet a long time ago. And here's another thought, too, Lloyd. This also, there is some similarities with the Starchild and what some of these Egyptian sculptures look like in those days. Most of them a little more elongated, at least the pharaoh's heads. What about the possibility this was going on all around the planet at that time?
Well, at 900 years ago, the Egyptians were pretty much long gone as far as the classic Egyptian culture.
Right.
Also, the classic
type.
the classic Egyptian culture, the head elongation of like Akhenaten, for example, that is much more like the cone heads than the Starchild. Remember, the Starchild has a flattened rear gray type look, whereas the cone heads and Akhenaten and all have that like tubular, the crystal skull from the Indiana Jones movie. It looks much more like that than does the Starchild. The Starchild does not have a large head in that sense. It has a reconstructed head on the inside, but it's got a distinctive look. If you go on the website, www.starchildproject.com, and look at the pictures of it, you'll see it doesn't look anything like the cone heads. It doesn't look anything like the crystal skull in the Indiana Jones movie.
No, which we're going to talk about next next hour, by the way, crystal skulls.
But it's so the Starchild is unique, George. People say to me, "Well, is there anything else like it in the world?" No. As far as I know, and believe me, if there's one thing I know now, it's weird skulls. I get every one of them out there sent to me. There is really nothing like it. I mean, absolutely not even in the ballpark. But the coniads, there's a lot like them. There's hundreds of those in museums in Peru. Those were a people. Those